Okay, phones are out, so it must be Q&A time. It's actually part 3 of the January Q&A. We've already done 2 parts, so good for us. But these are, the Patreon questions. So they're always a mixed bag of fun, the Patreon questions. So let's get into them. The first one, very serious question here. Didn't your mothers ever teach you that it's rude to point? Well, in our culture, it's rude not to point. Pointing at people is a great sign of respect. So, yes, thank you, Tim. I appreciate that. Steve, generally speaking, do you use built-in benchmarking tools for games that feature it, or do you find manually testing to be more consistent/reliable? So, we do custom benchmark passing. Custom benchmark passes more often than not, just because we can usually pick a section of the game that we feel is representative of either the game overall or the more demanding sections of that game. And it also makes it harder for AMD or NVIDIA, let's say on the GPU side, to optimize for the canned benchmarks. That's also a factor. But if the game has a really good dynamic benchmark that it represents sort of the performance you'll see in the game, and it's just a good built-in benchmark, then we will sometimes use that. So a good example would be like F1 2019. I feel like the built-in tool in that's really good. Probably at least as accurate as what we could do, but a bit more thorough and just a bit easier. Like benchmarking a car racing game and like sort of staying in line with the other cars and going around the corners, and that can be difficult unless you're a bit of a pro. And with the keyboard and mouse, I'm not a pro at those car games. And I'm not going to get the steering wheel out every time I have to benchmark F1 2019. So that's one example. But most games like Shadow of the Tomb Raider has a built-in tool. I don't really like it because a lot of it's not that representative of actual gameplay. And I feel the sort of more open world area of the game that we test later on is much more CPU demanding, so it's much better for CPU testing. The built-in thing's okay for GPU testing, but again, I tend to just stick to in-game performance. Yeah, and a lot of the time, you update your benchmark runs after I've played through the whole game. That's right, yeah. Because you're not a big single-player gamer, and I do end up playing a lot of games like Shadow of the Tomb Raider or Metro or really most of those. Then I'll just, after playing up to like 60 hours, I'll be like, okay, this section or this area, especially for open world games, like in Assassin's Creed, like this is the best area that I found the most intensive. So then you go back and maybe modify it if it's appropriate. And a lot of the time, those more intensive areas are more intensive than that game's built-in benchmark. A game like Assassin's Creed, you can get to some areas that are more intensive than its benchmark, although its benchmark is quite intensive. Yeah, Metro it's almost too intensive, and it's weird the way it just flies around. It's much better to play that game than use the built-in benchmark, in my opinion. Yep. So, it's pretty much how it works. Would either of you consider going to LTX in 2020 if invited? Need your signatures on my mod mat. Did we talk about this on last month's live stream or the Q&A? I think it was the live stream just before this. There was one of the people asked in our live chat about it. We about a month ago we had a discussion and we were joking about how neither of us can hold a pen properly, and we'd like scribble like that. People joke about doctor's handwriting. Oh yeah, my handwriting is terrible. I feel like mine's worse because I just never ever pick up a pen. And I think we had the discussion with you thought maybe all the American YouTubers they all seem to have like calligraphy style, they're all invented like a really nice looking signature. And you thought it might be because you have to sign more for paying bills and things over there, whereas you don't really do that here. Yeah. Anyway, basically, Tim and I it would look like you'd let a small child with a Sharpie near your your mod mat, and we'd probably destroy it. But hey, we'll have a crack. But to answer the question, yes, we would consider it. Yeah, as for LTX, I think personally we haven't really talked about this a lot. I would like to go if it was possible to go. I think if we were adding another international trip to our calendar on top of Computex, LTX is probably the next thing I'd want to attend. Yep, just because we'd be able to do a lot of you ask for collaborations with other YouTubers, and because we live in Australia, it's like, that's kind of impossible. I can't just rock up at Gamers Nexus headquarters or anything. It's there's no other tech YouTubers that I'm aware of in Melbourne. Yeah. So even in Australia, we would have to fly to another city. Yeah, that's right. So it'd be good to
get some other people on our channel, have a chat with some of the people that you guys watch and do some things like that. So LTX would be a great opportunity to do that. And yeah, hopefully it's something we can make happen.
Yep. Over the years, brands have risen and disappeared, such as A-Bit's disappearance. Tim didn't even know who A-Bit was. I'm like, do you remember A-Bit or A-Open?
It feels like you bring this up a lot.
Because it shocked me. Shocked me to the core, Tim.
All right,
and Noctua's dominance. With smaller brands, have you seen smaller brands come out of nowhere lately? And are there any worth keeping an eye on? So back in the A-Bit days when... I wouldn't say the industry was forming, but there was a lot of companies competing to get to where ASUS, Gigabyte, and MSI have today. And obviously there wasn't room for that many companies, so we've shrunk down to where we're at. So I don't think there's really any room for that to happen anymore.
Especially with products becoming more complex, like to have a new player come in and start developing a motherboard, which is, much more complicated these days than it has been in the past. It's like... there's a lot of engineering work that a startup would have to do. It's like, how difficult is that?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a surprisingly large amount of case manufacturers still. And then a lot of them, like Cooler Master, Corsair, they're doing cases, cooling, multiple different fan lines, all kinds of stuff. So it's pretty hard to even step into those markets now. They're very well saturated. So yeah, there's just a lot of established big players covering all those different product categories. So it's pretty hard to break into now. How many takes does Tim need on a typical monitor review segment? Watching the alphabet soup that was the ViewSonic VX2758 2KP MHD review. That's easy. I did that first time.
Nice.
I was quite amazed at the clarity of pronunciation. I think I did a better job then, though.
It's pretty good.
No, it wasn't very good. VX2758 2KP MHD. Feel like I have a bit of practice, though, with all the bloody tongue twisters that I have.
Oh, they're shocking.
Seriously. So, anyway, do you practice saying the monitor names before you have to harmonic like other actors that you say? Well... I think probably in the script stage when you're sort of saying it in your head, that's when you... Yeah. For me, that's when you sort of...
That's absolutely it.
Yeah, okay.
I think a lot of the time, like when I'm writing a script, I will not necessarily practice or read over or test out the middle section where I'm going over the performance numbers, but I do often, say the conclusion out loud before I film it just so that I can get a feel for how it sounds, how I might tone it and all that sort of thing. So that, to see whether it flows well, because I think that's one of the most important parts of the review is the conclusion part. So often at that point, I've already said the name a couple of times, but also just having so many monitors that are named like this, I can now just read these sort of things and just go, oh yeah, that's the VX2758 2KP MHD, or, one of the reviews I did recently is like the VG27AQ. You just sort of companies use similar product lines, so they always use similar combinations of letters and numbers.
I find that's when it's the worst, though, that you're like reviewing a product that you've been familiar with for like a year, and then there's a new product and it's got like one letter or character different.
Yeah.
And, it's so hard not to confuse the two.
Yeah, it's painful. So even with some of the news segments that I do covering monitors, I can generally, without practicing, get the monitor name right the first time.
Okay.
So yeah, it's just... You see a lot of these things and you just suddenly get good at reading like codes. So, yeah. Do you ever see a possibility of Intel making a second Conroe comeback like they did back in the Pentium 4 versus Athlon days? It feels like we are living in the second AMD golden age, so to speak, but the circumstances are different now. Intel no longer has the fab process lead. However, it would be interesting to hypothesize what their comeback would be like. Yeah, it's interesting because back in Pentium 4, they were big on the marketing development funds type thing of sort of, spending a lot of money, whether that was dodgy or not dodgy, to get ahead in that market. They did have good products back then, obviously, but that helped them a lot.
Yeah, they've got other things in the works, though. It's like they're not architecturally or design limited. So once, it's a pretty big problem they've got to solve, but once they solve that, they're sort of back up and running straight away.
Yeah, and they've managed to, even with the struggles that they've had, some people were saying, 14 nanometer plus would be like the death of Intel because it's another year that they're
hanging on well.
They can't iterate. and your AMD will just come in and crush them with Zen 2. And you look at, Intel is still have a competitive product in the 9900K using a 4-year-old process node and architecture effectively. And it's possible that we're going to get another year with it. So 5 years of essentially the same architecture and process node still being reasonably competitive. And it will come down to pricing, of course. But in that sense, like, they've still managed to keep themselves very competitive. So as you say, as soon as they can take a leap beyond the technology that they've developed right now and go to a new node, whether that's 7nm, Intel 7nm that is, all that stuff could just be evaporated immediately and they'll start being very competitive again. So obviously it's possible, and you never see with these things with a company as large as Intel that they die completely from the position that they're in. I mean,
it's not going to happen.
They are so massive that to have them completely die out would require I don't know how many CEOs they'd have to fire and engineers they'd have to hire and how many cycles do they have to go before they completely collapse and are not competitive. They'll be back.
Yep. How much RGB is too much RGB? All the RGB?
You're an RGB fan?
I have all the RGB in there. Looks pretty cool.
I don't mind RGB.
Yeah. I mean, that's really R and B with no G.
I like my 8 million RGB lights in some sort of organised panel that you can use to show things.
Yeah. I mean, I can take it or leave it, to be honest with you. My personal systems, I usually just disable them. But
I just leave it on default. I'm like, whatever it ships with is fine for me.
Tim's rainbow.
Yep. I think it is actually rainbow at the moment in mine.
It would be.
Although it is nice to let you know quite bright that your system is on, just in case there's an issue or something. Okay.
Do you have any insight into why companies choose to produce bad products, i.e. MSI's X570 Gaming Pro Carbon or the Asus TUF 5700 XT? I mean, these companies spend thousands of dollars on advertising to pull in customers who presumably don't read reviews, only to have those same people vote and never buy that brand again. A common sentiment with both these products. Do you think they were not tested extensively prior to release or just extreme cost cutting? I don't really know what to think. So with the MSI X570 stuff, I was scratching my head there.
Pretty surprising.
I've got a few theories. They're just theories. I have no idea. Obviously, MSI is never going to tell me how it happened, and they're really the only people that could answer this question. The same goes for Asus with the TUF. I think in Asus's case, again, this is just me guessing, no idea. I think it's probably they just got lazy. They're considered to be the best. Maybe they bought into their own hype. I don't know. It just seems like it was lazy. It was a product, like some of their products that they have messed up on. It seems like, they were just lazy. They just thought we're Asus, we're the best. We'll toss this together and it'll work, and it didn't. I don't know. That's my guess there. I've thought about the MSI X570 gaming, or just the sort of entry level to mid range MSI X570 thing. Makes no sense because they seemed to be well aware that everyone was starting to focus on VRM performance because of guys like BuildZoid, and that sort of inspired R testing. Actually, R testing was sort of inspired by, I think, Gamers Nexus, or just, I think maybe even viewer feedback. Probably a combination of things. But we started doing it. You guys liked it. We kept doing it. They were aware that we were testing it. Others were testing it. So it was becoming a thing that viewers were interested in. I think a few people like Anantech, we did a poll on like, what do you want to see in motherboard reviews? Do you want to see like BIOS walkthroughs? Do you want to, feature sets, RGB lighting, whatever, or VRM layout? And like VRM by far and away was the most heavily voted thing that people cared about. So the point I'm trying to make is, taking all that into account, somehow they didn't focus on that. They focused on it with their B450 range, and that sold like hotcakes because it was so good. And because of that, everyone naturally thought, well, MSI's focused on, making a board with a good quality VRM. Their X570 range will be the one to watch out for. And they were the only ones that screwed it up massively. So my only theory there is they made the B450 Tomahawk and the Pro Carbon B450 boards. Everyone praised them for how well they worked with, like, a 2700X processor. And because that has a similar power draw to a 3900X. They thought we can slap a similar quality VRM on our X570 boards, get away with that, and people will be happy enough, and that will extend our profit margins. Except it was a disaster. Well, I can't even explain how the hell they thought that Gaming Pro Carbon board would, because that's worse than the B450 Tomahawk by some stretch. I don't know if that was just, I don't know what that was. I can't explain it. But I think maybe they were just trying to maximize profit margins in that instance and completely underestimated how bad those boards would be. So I think that's the case there. And I think Asus just got lazy because it seems a bit sloppy what they did there. So, yeah, but pulling them up as hard as we have and others have, I think that's going to help sort of, I know Asus are disappointed with their recent performances. So I think they really want to release some new products that correct that. And I know MSI is disappointed because they quickly released the Unify and now we've got the Tomahawk incoming. So that's good to see.
Yep.
So if it leads to better products, then that's good for everyone.
Is there any such thing as a 1440p high refresh gaming monitor with genuine HDR specifications? It seems like proper HDR is limited to very expensive high-end 4K monitors. So the answer there is pretty much no. And I think the reason for that is basically adding those genuine HDR specifications is very expensive. Mm-hmm. Like putting a full array local dimming backlight clearly costs a fortune to do because those 4K monitors are $1,500, $2,000. The ultra wides are $2,000, well over $2,000. So when you've got that sort of situation and you're sort of having to price your monitor 3 or 4 times what a non-HDR capable monitor is able to do, you're going to have a situation where you've got a 1440p monitor that would normally cost $300, $400, suddenly costing over $1,000. So I think the reason why we don't see that is that if you're going to spend, $1,000 on a monitor, you really want super high-end specs. So that would be 4K, a 4K resolution, which with high refresh rate. So I think that's just why it is. The technology is simply not there yet to bring genuine HDR to more of a mid-range resolution, which 1440p is right now. So I think we will continue to see HDR stuck on those high-end monitors for a while, simply because of pricing. It'll be really nice to see like a $500 1440p gaming monitor that has good HDR, but we're just not there yet.
I think it is genuinely an expensive thing to implement, as Tim says. It's not like Samsung and whoever else have got together and said, let's charge a premium for this technology, because one of the players, there's a few guys that are known for making affordable monitors, one of them would have made an affordable HDR monitor. Yeah,
and people seem to like look at TVs and stuff and think, oh, you can get genuine HDR on a TV for a lot less than you can get it in a monitor. And part of that reason is that TV manufacturers subsidize the cost of their monitors by having, or their TVs, by making them smart and having all that content detection features in it. So basically, they sell data based on what you're watching on your TV to offset the cost of the TV. That's why they're so cheap. And another reason as well is that TVs are a lot lower density in terms of their technology. So you can, if you're making it a backlight, it's easier to cool that sort of thing on a 55 or 65 inch TV than it is on like a 27-inch monitor. So basically, it's easier to make.
We need malware in our monitors to get better HDR.
Yeah, so if you're willing to have a smart monitor where they can sell all your viewing data.
It has ads pop up down the bottom every now and then. There'll be HDR ads. So companies have gotten in trouble for that before. I know there was a big controversy with a company that doesn't sell in Australia but is big in the US, in Vizio. They were like, how are your TVs so cheap? And they're basically like, yeah, we sell your data, and people got really mad about it. It's like, I wonder why.
Pretty much everyone does it, so that's just life. If AMD's 4000 series of mobile processors are as good as they looked in the keynote, do you think Intel will take a while to respond with anything meaningful? Also, do you think the APUs will help AMD make a lot of ground in the laptop market too? Will Intel be able to respond with anything meaningful? I mean, I think they will still be pretty competitive because their current products are pretty good. And also they've been able to bring out their new process nodes and architectures to the mobile part. So they're not just stuck on 14 nanometer and Skylake. They have been able to bring the Sunny Cove CPU core, which has a lot of architectural changes to their laptops, and they should still be able to iterate on that throughout the next couple of generations, or even introduce new architectures on new nodes. So they should still be pretty competitive there. I can't see them slipping as far back as they have on the desktop. So yeah, I don't think they will need to respond. They'll just need to keep making their products as they have been. Will it help the APUs help make AMD make a lot of ground? that's more of like a marketing thing. I think even if the products are really good, they'll still could struggle to gain a lot of ground simply because it will be the first generation that will be really good. And generally it will take a lot of time for OEMs who are conservative. A lot of buyers don't understand AMD products and want Intel specifically, even if they're an inferior product. I think
that's the biggest factor.
So all of those things, and there's a lot of marketing funds that Intel has, whether that's big discounts when you buy chips in bulk that AMD can't afford to do, or whatever the situation is, Intel is a lot better set up there, and I think it'll take many generations of AMD processors being good, competitive, or even better to have that situation.
It's definitely
changed.
that mindshare thing. And for how many years did Intel do mainstream advertising? It's like and you don't
the jingle that everyone knows.
You haven't got that with AMD. They don't have that mindshare. I've spoke about this before on the channel, but I chat with retailers quite often and ask them about various sales and how things are moving, and some of them are quite open with me. Basically, the message I've got from all of them is with like their pre-built systems is that if you put a Ryzen 7 3700X or 3800X, so Zen 2 Ryzen 7 processor, it just doesn't sell. Whereas like a Core i7 will. So like Core i7 heavily outsells Ryzen 7, but in the do-it-yourself kind of parts market, Ryzen 7 just outsells Core i7 right now, by a million miles. It's not even a competition. So basically enthusiasts, guys like Tim, myself, probably most of you watching this, will likely be building a Ryzen system these days, but people who are buying pre-built systems or things from Dell or whatever, they're looking for that Intel logo. That's what they want. They want an Intel CPU because that's the best.
Yeah, and that'll change over time, as it won't necessarily need AMD's laptop products to be good, but it will just need... it flows down from people like us and you guys who are enthusiasts through to the rest of the market slowly over time. As, people who are interested in buying a gaming PC look at maybe their mates have built one, maybe they're more of an enthusiast, and they go, I put an AMD CPU in my system. And then that person who may be more buying a pre-built then is considering AMD because the higher end person has bought the Ryzen system. So that'll push through the market, and eventually it'll come over time down to, those laptop products, and they'll probably be the last product to change. And I think the consoles could even help them a lot here as well, into having, at the launch of the PS4 and Xbox, AMD wasn't allowed to tell as much about the technology used in those consoles. Now it seems to be more of a thing that is being shared about how they're using Zen 2 technology. And I think when those really mainstream gamers get an idea of, this is the AMD hardware that's in this, I think that could assist them in that sort of market as well. So it's just about doing whatever they can to improve it over time.
Okay, as much as RGB has a very love-hate relationship with pretty much everyone except Linus. Does Linus?
I think he loves it. Okay. Loves the RGB.
Okay, yeah. Do you think you could include installing and testing the software in each of your motherboard reviews? Damn it, I don't do motherboard reviews. I have a feeling not enough tech press include this in their reviews. Buyers are stuck with either settings that don't stick or software that is basically broken altogether. Maybe the manufacturers would come together and create unified software. It's never going to happen if they knew about all the faults. So yeah, basically I don't do motherboard reviews, and I'm not interested in RGB. I'm about as interested in RGB as probably like Steve from Gamers Nexus. Some of the RGB effects are kind of cool. They're fun to play with, but it's like an afterthought for me. And this isn't sort of a normal system I would build. This is a set piece. It's just meant to be eye-catching and kind of cool. It was fun to build. But my own PC, I usually just disable. Were we talking about this?
Yeah, we were talking about it just before, yeah.
I disable it. Tim leaves it on Rainbow, whatever. But the point of my motherboard content is to look at VRM performance, because a crappy VRM can really ruin the experience and your upgrade path and that kind of stuff. And it also seems like something that the majority of you are interested in. And I don't think many of you want to listen to me talking about RGB effects and software. But yeah, so the software is generally pretty garbage, pretty buggy. I don't want that crap open on my system, so I just don't install it. I'll probably disable things at the BIOS level or whatever if I care, or just leave it in rainbow mode. So that's not something we'll really do. But yeah, it would be good if someone could push them to make that stuff better. But for now, I don't think that's going to be us, because we're just not passionate enough about RGB lighting.
Or if there was someone out there that was willing to test that stuff in depth and was interested in it, I think that could be yeah, good for a channel that's not ours, maybe.
Yeah. But basically, the manufacturers don't care too much about how well the software works. They just want to use it to sell people, oh, look, it's got fancy lights and it can do this stuff. So
there were lots of mini LED monitors and laptops shown at CES this year. When do you expect mini LED products to actually show up at retail? I'd love a mini LED version of the Predator X27. Sounds like that stuff is coming this year. I'm not sure when. Certainly the panels that will be using, the panels they need for those monitors are coming this year. So I would expect to see them again at Computex and then have a release later this year. But they're going to be very expensive. I think there was even one manufacturer that announced the pricing on one of their monitors. It was like over $3,000 or something. So very, very, very expensive. So it'll be a niche thing. I'll hopefully get to test it out. But yeah, hopefully it's not a situation like the previous gen where they announced them and it took like 2 years to come out. I think it'll be a bit quicker this time.
You hope it'll be a bit quicker?
I hope so. I see Jared from Jared's Tech, who is a member of our Discord community, has decided to put in a question for the Q&A. Is this his first ever question?
There's no way you won't find a comment from Jared below this video. Mark my words, he'll be there somewhere.
Yeah, he'll be there. What do you make of the lack of higher-end AMD Ryzen 4000 based laptops at CES? The Asus G14 was the highest model available, but even that is the lower power 4800HS with 2060 Max-Q graphics. There were no 5700M or 2070 and above laptops with Ryzen 4000. It seems like companies are mostly using Ryzen 4000 for their budget machines. Do you think this tells us that in actual games, Intel is still a better option for them, or could they be waiting for new NVIDIA parts to pair with Ryzen? I think this ties back into what we were just talking about with the marketing ability of these companies. I think that even if AMD has good quality products and if they perform well, they will still be hamstrung by laptop buyers wanting Intel parts specifically.
Yep.
So if these companies like Asus feel that they can't sell a 2070 or above system with an AMD CPU inside, and I think we even see that on the GPU side, they can't really sell 5700M laptops either. That's the reason why they'll continue to use Intel there. They might dabble in a few systems to test the market, like there might be an Intel and an AMD option available, but I definitely don't think we'll see AMD exclusive products. And yeah, this could just be a big testing of the waters type thing. Will they sell a lot in the low end that will encourage them to bring those parts in? Will they be cheaper, which might encourage people to buy them? These are all things that we'll have to wait and see. I think it's still very early for those products, though. I wouldn't be sort of just looking at what's been announced at CS and thinking that's all we're getting. I think we will see maybe even when Intel releases their new Comet Lake laptops, when a lot of laptop manufacturers may refresh their designs, that they will use that same design for an AMD product, and they'll just wait for the Intel product at the same time to sort of do a double refresh.
If Intel's still spending a lot of money as well to subsidize notebook makers and stuff and keep them in there, it's going to be really next to impossible for AMD to capture that mind share, even if they have a vastly superior product.
Yeah, that's right. I think, like we said before, it's going to be a slow burn for those products to be converted to people.
AMD has to hope they can. AMD has to hope they can stay in front and pretty much well in front for a long time.
Yeah, I think when you sort of read mainstream tech sites like take your Engadget or something, you sort of see that there is frustration there among laptop buyers that they haven't been getting good performance gains gen on gen with Intel parts. But I think that they haven't yet been converted to an AMD product. And I think there is an opportunity there for that sort of type of influencer to start getting on board with the AMD train there, which might help things out a bit if these parts perform really well. But will that actually change companies' plans in this generation is, up in the air. I don't think it will. So again, slow process for them, but for us people that actually know what's going on and know which products are good, if they're really affordable, good quality AMD parts out there, then we'll be telling you about them and you can go buy them and enjoy a good, better system than Intel people are getting. So that might be what's going to happen. Who knows?
Okay, not quite sure what this question is, but I'll read it out. It's there. Is Tim trying not to injure himself again, as I would hate to see him scar himself with trying to open a car boot? The face is your moneymaker. We can't have you injured. It's your... Okay.
A moneymaker.
I wouldn't have gone that far, but okay. Otherwise, Steve will have to do monitor reviews. Ugh, That'd be rough.
Yeah, you wouldn't be enjoying your
I'm
life there.
I'm not trained to read those.
I try not to injure myself. That was a really dumb thing I did a few months ago. It's been smooth sailing since then. No more injuries.
You've been working on the channel now for 2 years.
Yeah,
he's only met the car boot once. So it took him like a week to heal. So
yeah,
I think he'll be fine. If he does it once every 2 years,
I'll be right.
He'll live.
All right, I've got a long question from one of our Patreon members, which is fine. So we'll try to get through some of these.
You get one question per month.
Any idea why Navi failed to debut in AMD's APUs at all? Was this reasonably expected or a complete surprise? It seems like with those APU technologies, that it takes a long time for them to sort of get their GPU technology integrated. It seems like they still need to be keeping that a fair... Those products are in the oven for a long time, so they can't just get the GPU tech as soon as it's ready for discrete and put that straight into the APU. And I think when they would have been developing these products was right around when Navi was coming out for discrete.
Yeah.
So that's probably a bit too early for that.
Well, whatever the reason, they said the scheduling didn't line up.
Yeah,
so
that tends to be why it is. What are your thoughts about cases? I found the new cases to be rather lackluster. Yeah, we generally don't care too much about cases. We just buy one that we like. Well, I mean, we get sent a lot of cases, but if we were, we just buy one that looks good.
Yeah,
has the features we need.
Yeah, generally you can't go too wrong within reason. If it looks like it'll have decent airflow, it generally does. If it looks like there's a glass panel shoved right up against the fans, generally not going to work too well. It's not rocket science. But yeah, cases don't really interest us. That's not to say that case reviews aren't important. Like Gamers Nexus do good work there, so they've really helped improve that industry. But yeah, it's not really our area of interest, so let them do that. Yeah.
Thoughts on new water cooling equipment? Any new best of for the new cooling tech? Is water cooling becoming more mainstream, and OEMs beginning to think as such? Not sure if you mean like open loop or closed loop, because there's definitely been a lot of closed loop stuff. I'd say is fairly mainstream at this point. The
water cooling stuff's got a little easier to work with and better quality, but it still has all the sort of same pitfalls that it's always had, which is it's more expensive. Do you really need it? It's more of a really enthusiast sort of thing, and it can leak still, and you can run into problems like that. AIOs, they still can leak, but they've gotten really good with their designs. They're refined, so leakage isn't as common as it once was, but you get pump failure and stuff like that. So whereas with a good heatsink, it's like you replace the fan.
Thoughts on NVIDIA's silence? Just not the right time for them at CES. They generally, as we mentioned before, use their own event to announce stuff. And it seems like they're still a fair way off announcing new products.
If they had made a major launch in September, CES might have seen the RTX 2060 equivalent. So like your RTX 3060, for example, if that was to happen. So it'd be somewhat of a major product launch, but not a major series launch. And
they had come out of the 1650 Super not that long ago. Like it's only a few months ago that product launched. So it wouldn't surprise me to see now them they finished their lineup. We're going to wait a bit for...
Well, that was the same thing with AMD and the Zen 3 stuff. It's like the 3950X is selling like hotcakes. They're selling those things as fast as they can pump them out. And it really didn't hit the market that long ago.
Yeah.
Same with 3rd gen Threadripper, though.
They haven't even released the 3990X yet.
Yeah, exactly.
So, thoughts on Big Navi? We've already talked about that, so we'll skip over that. And all this DDR5 news, how far away is DDR5 really?
Did I say when we talked about this ages ago that 2021 would be the... Was that?
Yeah, so it seems like they're sampling DDR5 now. It doesn't sound like the first server platforms will come until 2021, which means for consumer, you're probably looking 2022, 2023 or something. Yeah,
probably coming to server, high-end desktop platform, mainstream. So that sounds right.
Could be expensive when it comes out, which is why it doesn't come to consumer platforms for a while. Mm-hmm. Given your recent video, this is actually a new person now. So
finally onto a new person.
Given your recent video on 2 versus 4 sticks, will you be moving to 4 sticks for GPU benchmarking?
Interesting question. I see why you would suggest that. I don't know exactly. I'm going to go with no for now, just because it doesn't really improve performance that much for the most part. It's sort of game dependent. But the reason I think I wouldn't, and again, I probably have to put a lot more thought into this, but I think I wouldn't just because we want to keep things sort of as simple as possible, just so we can get accurate results. And when you go, certain motherboards or whatever, it's like normally it shouldn't be a problem. But I think the difference between 2 sticks and 4 sticks, not a big deal. Now maybe we might go dual ranked 2 sticks. That might be something that we look at doing. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think on that one?
I don't know. I mean, on one hand, it's kind of like if you want to alleviate as many bottlenecks as possible, then maybe you would go down the dual ranked stick path. But on the other hand, how many people are using dual ranked sticks? Is that going to come into calculation? Like if most people are using single ranked, then maybe it makes more sense to continue testing with that. Yeah, it's hard to say which makes more sense, I think, at the moment.
Yeah. I think just keeping it simple but still getting close to maximum performance is probably the way to go, just for accurate results. But yeah, I think at the end of that, it doesn't make too much sense. Like if you're talking about using something like, a Ryzen 5 3600 versus a 1900K, obviously for scientific testing, the 1900K makes sense. But yeah, I think it's good to include these sort of investigations or separate videos separately rather than sort of lump them all together. But yeah, it's something to think about anyway. Okay, we've got a question here which may not be that easy to answer. What kind of generational improvement do you use as a goal benchmark for GPUs? So the thing with that is, some generations, like with the 5500 XT video that I just did, some generations you get like 12 months. And it's a tough one to do because although I compared it to... Because I'm doing a pricing comparison, MSRP comparison, because really the R9 370X, that was a refresh of a refresh.
Yep.
So it gets kind of complicated to make those comparisons. The years aside, so however many years it was, I feel like to justify the introduction of a new product, it should be like at least 30%. Would you say? At least. Like
again, it depends how many years you've been waiting for that performance gain.
Yeah, that's right. The years really complicate it.
I think in modern day, with the way processed tech's been going in architectures, I think if you can get double-digit gains per year, like year on year, you're doing pretty well. Yeah. But that is without price increases, obviously. And also, that is like, sometimes you might get less, sometimes you might get more.
Well, so from the GTX 950, the Maxwell part, to the Pascal GTX 1050 Ti, that was a 35% increase, and the 1050 Ti was actually a little bit cheaper. But that's a 35% increase in 1 year. So you're like, that's pretty solid. But then to get the next 35% increase, it took another 3 years. So that's like your 10% per year to go from the 1050 Ti to the 1650 Super. Yeah. And the 1650 Super was NVIDIA's second go at it in the same year.
Yeah.
For a $10 premium. So it's such a tough one to answer because, yeah.
I think, if you're getting 10% gains per year, or very low double-digit gains per year.
So you just don't upgrade every year, you wait 3 years to upgrade.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, that makes it a point where someone is upgrading. A lot of people don't upgrade every year. They might wait 2 or 3 years. We hear about lots of people still on 900 series or Pascal GPUs from NVIDIA. Then you start getting to the point where when you make an upgrade within the same price that you were looking at previously, you're probably going to be looking at 30 to 40% gains, which I think for an upgrade is pretty okay.
I think so as well. I think if the situation was we didn't have the RX 470, which became the RX 570, and we were purely looking at just the Pascal-based 1050 Ti, and that was a 3-year-old point of reference that we were upgrading from, then you're looking at like a 35% increase. So you're like, it's not as great as... It's not awesome getting that over 3 years as it is within 1 year, but it still warrants some kind of upgrade. Whereas we're looking at like... I can't even remember what it was. It was like 10% or something after 3 years. So,
yeah, I think the reason why this question comes up a lot these days is because we've had that essentially a generation of stagnation. We've had it's been reasonably competitive in the lower end of the market, but not super competitive, mostly held up by products like the RX 570 and RX 580. But then in the upper end, we've had NVIDIA release a new architecture, which did improve performance when you compare similar products, but they also increase pricing. So you get the situation where, yeah, sure, a 2060 is a fair bit more powerful than a 1060, but it also moved up a price category. So that's kind of thrown everything out of whack, and really that would have continued this 10% year on year, except really, you get 30% to begin with and then nothing for a few years.
Yeah.
Which I think is fine. And I think that sort of 3-year cadence also is good, because you think about how long does it take games to require more processing power? And I think 3 years is about right. 2 to 3 years when you start to see the next sort of wave of really intense games come out compared to the previous wave.
Well, I think I've already answered this question though, because we did the GTX 1070, which was that was 380 MSRP, I think.
Yep.
Versus the Radeon 5700 XT.
Yep.
$400 MSRP, so only $20 difference. But you got about a 50% improvement over the 3 years. And I was pretty impressed with that.
That was about 15% per year.
Yeah. If you're spending $400 US on a graphics card, I mean, everyone's different. I'm just heavily generalizing here. But I know if I was spending about $400 US on a graphics card, I'd want it to last a couple of years. So I feel like every 3 years going for an upgrade for 50% more performance is probably pretty good.
Yeah, and that's keeping you up to date with, that's fairly in line with, we talk about consoles a fair bit. You think of a 7-year console cycle. Generally, you'd be upgrading your GPU twice during that period, and generally the consoles appear to be around twice as powerful as the previous one whenever they come out with it. So if you're getting 50% and then another 50%, you're actually over the 2x, are you? Not quite 2x. But you're certainly getting a fairly substantial performance gain there. So
yeah. So I think that's it. Like the 50-ish% gain you're looking at there, that's pretty good. That's acceptable. It's not amazing. It's not like a 90% gain you saw, like what we saw with the RX 470 versus the R9 370X, but 50% still a substantial performance upgrade. That's pretty huge. But I can't even remember the exact figures now, but like 10 or 11%.
Yeah, it's just not.
It's like if you bought yourself an RX 470 for the $180 US or whatever it was nearly 4 years ago now, it's like you're sitting there going, what the hell do I do? Like,
yeah, it's just nothing worth.
It's like you can either spend more money and jump up to a 5700 series card, or just keep twiddling your thumbs and tuning those quality settings. And
yeah, and I think this is also where competition between AMD and NVIDIA is so crucial, because generation on generation, you don't necessarily need to get like a strict 10-15% performance gain. They can also achieve that by making like a minor performance increment, but then reducing pricing to be more competitive. So,
well, that's what you see with the refreshes that happened over and over again.
So that, AMD not having, a good mid-range part until recently, and still not having a high-end part, has really impacted the gains we're getting gen on gen in those markets. And it's really just left one battle to be fought not particularly well. And most of the time that's just been fought by AMD taking the RX 470 and making it cheaper. They're not actually releasing until recently a new product there. They're just going, okay, we'll drop this by $10 and then $10 and $10, and over time that looks okay.
Well, that's the worst part about that comparison, because there isn't, with the $400 5700 XT, there are secondhand market excluded, because that's a whole different kettle of fish. What do you get for $400 or near $400 that delivers that level of performance? What are your alternative options? Like Pascal cards now, suppliers run out there. You can't buy a GTX 1070 for a heavily discounted price. So it's like, if you've got $400 to spend, it's that or a 2060 Super. They're your two options. Or you go second hand and try and get something like a 1080 Ti. That's the situation there. The situation at the sub $200 market is you buy a brand new 5700 RX 570 rather for like $130 US. So the video, I didn't even factor that in. I stressed that multiple times in the video. So that's where it gets really bad, that if you're buying today, it's like you buy the Polaris card.
Yeah.
So that's where the stagnation's even worse. Factoring that in.
Yeah, and similar to what we might be seeing on, to continue this discussion further, because it's really interesting. You sort of look at some of the things that we're hearing about happening in the CPU market to remain competitive is, for example, Intel might start backporting their 10 nanometer technology to 14 nanometers so they can split between the nodes when it makes more sense. And while they're not saying they might do that for GPUs as well, but as newer nodes mean that they're more expensive to produce, and if you're making a really large GPU, they're quite costly. We might see more of these generations where the lower end parts, just makes more sense to offer previous gen parts for cheap, and then introduce the higher end parts as new technology. And I think as it becomes much more difficult to squeeze gains out, that's some of the stuff that we could be seeing happening in the GPU market. Because you look at the 5500 and you're like, this product doesn't make any sense when they have already got a very compelling last generation product that they can sell for cheap. And who knows, they might actually be making a better margin on something like an RX 580 than they are on a 5500 XT.
I'm not sure about that, but I wouldn't be surprised. And everyone, well, not everyone, but a lot of people like to make out that it was important to update those cards because they were so power hungry. This came up so many times when comparing the RX 570 to the GTX 1650, and people were like, but I think the 1650 is a better card to get because I've only got a 350 watt power supply. That's like, if you look at the review, total system draw from the wall with a Core i9 9900K clocked to 5 gigahertz with an all-in-one liquid cooler, loads of fans, plenty of other high-end gear. It was drawing like 290 watts from the wall. So it's like you've got a bronze-rated 350 watt power supply, you've got a mid-range CPU in there drawing half as much power as an overclocked 9900K, possibly even less. It's like you can run an RX 570 in that system, no problem at all. So really, the power consumption of those parts, although they're not as efficient as they could be on newer process nodes, that you can still stick them with a low-end power supply. They're not going to blow the thing up.
Yeah, that's stuff. The power consumption stuff only matters for their laptop chips. And if they did my plan and they kept their old, last generation stuff for the cheaper products, they would suffer on laptops because they're more power constrained there, and the improvements that you could make gen on gen would be significant if they've got new nodes. But
and it
just depends what makes sense.
I think the power consumption thing, the argument I tried to make, I think in my top 5 GPUs video, I don't know where it was, where I upset all the AMD fans with my Vega comments again. I feel like with something like an RX 570, not a big deal. Budget power supply, the heat's pretty easy to deal with. Yeah, it uses more power, but it's not alarmingly high. But then when you get to the high end, efficiency does become kind of important because you're pushing the envelope there, and then you end up with a hot, loud card that does suck down a lot of power.
And it limits how high they can design that GPU, which is why, you haven't seen something fast in a Vega 64 because that in that generation, because it's like, well, that would be very power hungry and not great. So that's just how it is. Okay.
Okay.